let's talk about how you got to, Supple Leopard. Let's talk about a little bit of, growing up overseas. Let's talk about schooling. What just helped you decide to head into, PT school? What in the world motivated you to open a gym in a fucking parking lot? Just bring us up to speed up to, right before the book.
Well, it turns out, we'll start at the end. Parking lots are the new gyms, as you may know.
There we go.
And so, I just was a little ahead of my time in terms of putting up
20 years ahead of your time.
Pretty much. Well, the short story is, I think if you've known me a long time, and even when we were, this month, actually this week is when I put up the first ever 10-minute squat video, which was so bad, I filmed my crotch for 10 minutes with a camera. The iPhone didn't even have a video camera. YouTube was barely a thing. There's no Instagram. There's no Twitter. And what we started to do was to say, hey, look, I am suddenly meeting these world-class athletes. I'm spending more time in their communities, and I'm starting to see the overlap and where these positions and mechanics meet, which is really the synthesis, right? Because powerlifting is a sport. I think it's easy to forget that, but we can take the principles of powerlifting, and they're the greatest applications towards rehab I've ever seen. So, being able to hang out on the, at the wings of, spending time with you and spending time with Mark and, really learning how to deadlift. I mean, Jesse Burdick taught me how to deadlift. And I'd only been deadlifting for 30 years, but I didn't really understand deadlifting. And I think it wasn't very long ago, I called you up and I was like, dude, I understand. And you were like, congratulations. And, and really there's some fundamental pieces there where you were like saying, hey, I see that you can be really fit, but I still see that you're not strong enough yet. And not that I need to pull 600 or 700, 800, but you were like, hey, there's some basic benchmarks that you should have control over. And if we spin that back for a second, what you see is that my youth growing up, as I was a multi-sport athlete, I skied, I kayaked, I biked, I played soccer, I played, got to high school, I played as many sports. I was a 3-sport athlete in high school, like so many other people. And early on, growing up in Europe, we really worshiped the kid who was the best athlete, the kid who could pick up the new skill the fastest, the kid who was the most dynamic. And a lot of that was done through play and exposure. And what's interesting then is if you ported back into my, 13 or 14-year-old self, you'd see the same sort of curiosity. Like I want to dive deep. I want to understand. I want to feel. I raced at a high level of skiing, and I remember being at a World Cup, a camp put on by a World Cup champion, and diagramming the pressure of the foot during the turn, and I remember thinking like, oh, why doesn't everyone talk like this? And it turns out when I found strength and conditioning, that's how everyone spoke. And what we were seeing was, we were moving beyond just put another kilo on the bar, because that method was breaking a lot of athletes. And it broke me when I paddled on the U.S. canoe and kayak team. We were, paddling 11 to 13 times a week, 300 days a year. It was all about volume, and whoever could handle the most volume and most exposure won, until I paddled myself into a neck injury where I couldn't feel my hand. And that took me right off the team. And when I looked around and started asking people about that, they were like, oh yeah, this is totally common. It was like, what? What do you mean? You knew this was going to happen? You knew that my hand would go numb and my life would be over? And, fast forward then, I rehab, I'm out surfing, and I realized I need to go to PT school to try to get to the bottom of this, because I suddenly was obsessed with training, and it was really difficult. I mean, there was a time, I think it was like 98, 99, where I was like, hey, I think I need to do medicine ball work. I just need it. But there's no internet. So where do you find? So I found this book by Tudor Bompa about medicine ball work. And it was like a stick figure, like drawings of people throwing the medicine ball, no rep schemes, no context, right? No, just like, here's an exercise. So of course, what we did is we started at the beginning of the book and went through the whole book in one session. And my C2 partner and I were so crippled, we couldn't paddle for like 3 days because we were so blown out, so trashed. And he was like, dude, we can't ever do that again, And what I started to see then was, hey, there's something here in this Olympic lifting. There's something here around basic barbell training and gymnastics training. Boom, I find CrossFit the same semester I'm in my first year of PT school. And I suddenly realized that, man, physical therapy is not speaking the language of athletes. It's not helping. It's not in the same room as athletes. It doesn't around the equipment of athletes. Basically, an athlete's broken. They put up with something for as long as they can. Then they go see a physical therapist or a doctor when they can no longer do their sport. And for me, I felt like that was madness. And what I started to realize was that there was a better way to move, which was suggested by our physiology, suggested by power and wattage and poundage. That was the test. We put you into a better position, restore your mechanics. You lifted more. You went faster. And, so we started making videos in 2010. This next month, someone was like, hey, you need to write a book. And I was like, I think I do, but holy crap, where do I begin? You took the pictures of me in my garage, working on that stuff for the book. That's in 2011 or 2012. I mean, it's remarkable how long ago we've been working on this project and continue to evolve. So that's the short story, is that this is me and has always been me.
And, you glossed over a lot of stuff because you're a mildly humble human being for who you are and everything that you have really affected. We don't really have to get into the politics or anything of the thing, but when I was starting to experience, I was working at a CrossFit gym, and then, I'd met you maybe a year or so later, heard about, this guy named K-Star, and I was like, what's a K-Star? And, finally kind of got to your gym, and I really got an interesting perspective to see, the beginning of CrossFit to almost when people figured out who you were, and then to see the next evolution, the next leg of what CrossFit did. How do you think, was it the population of CrossFit? Were they just hungry, for information? Because in my opinion, I think you transformed CrossFit from basically a backyard bro fest into what could be considered, in athletic endeavor.
Well, what was interesting is that as you're a classic physical therapist, you don't see very many people. If you're in a mill, maybe you see a lot of people for a short time, but if you're a good physio, you're seeing a person an hour, and you just can't do more than about 8 or 10 of those a day. You're just going to burn out, and you can't connect the dots. But suddenly, everyone's under a barbell. Suddenly, everyone's doing push-ups. Suddenly, everyone's deadlifting. And it was like you had stripped the clothing off everyone, right? And what we suddenly realized was that the tenets of strength and conditioning, the classics of strength and conditioning, were the greatest diagnostic tool ever. I didn't need movement screens. I didn't need assessments, right? Because what I could see was, hey, you can't get into this shape. Your elbow flares every single time you bench. And as soon as you bench faster, boom, your elbow flares further. Well, it turns out, ready to take a drink, you didn't have any internal rotation of your shoulder, and no one pointed it out to you because it wasn't painful, right? So what we started to realize was that, man, we could connect the dots. And when we gave people their positions back, we saw changes in their mechanics. So suddenly I was around a ton of really good Olympic lifters, and I was around a bunch of really interesting powerlifters. And I started to understand running for the first time, and I really understand some of these, basic positions. And then you start to layer onto it that I started to have access to these big groups who are trying to solve the same sets of problems we are. And what I end up doing is get an interesting data set. Suddenly I'm with the U.S. rowing team, and suddenly I'm with professional football, and then I'm with professional soccer, and then I'm professional rugby. And then, and I started to get more and more information. And as you kind of rightfully pointed out, I wasn't in the clinic. I was in a gym coaching my ass off. And so it was like I was actually using the medicine that I was developing because I was trying to solve a set of problems. What do you mean you can't get into a snatch grip? What do you mean you can't put your arms over your head? Like, what are we talking about? You're doing pull-ups today, or you don't have any shoulder extension. Of course your shoulder hurts after we bench. So, in this middle of this time, suddenly everyone got beyond the intensity, or some people got beyond the intensity as the only crack, right? And suddenly we were in, and we were really interested, and people were stopped being so weak. They stopped being so protected by their weakness, protected by their lack of conditioning. And all of a sudden it mattered more and more and more. And then I had CrossFit Games champions, and, we started helping people solve their problems. So, to the extent that, right place, right time, I was really lucky that I had this living laboratory all the time to try to figure out what's going on. And what I've really come to believe is, who owns position? Is it your coach responsibility? Is it the physical therapist, the doctor? It's you. And when you have pain, that is a normal experience of training, and you better have a model for dealing with that. And what we told a generation of athletes was, oh, you have pain, that's a medical problem. And that is horse shit. That's horse shit.
And, there's so many things that, impressed me of, who you are as a person and a professional. But I think that was something just completely revolutionary, because when I started in the strength and conditioning world, my mentors were, in AT, classical hand PT, and a chiropractor. And it was always after the fact you started to do all this stuff. Then when I kind of got off and started going in to do my own stuff and found you, and you were like, oh no, you need to own this. It's your problem and you can fix it. You have the right to move well, and it's not that hard in order to do that. Speaking like from that lens, as a doctor of physical therapy, basically trashing your own people, saying, look, these guys are lying to you. You should be able to do this all on your own. You don't need to be seeing a PT 2 times a week for the rest of your life. Clean up your own shit. Take care of yourself. How was the backlash from your own profession from that? Was it welcoming you with open arms, or finally someone said it, or Jesus, fuck you, dude?
Well, if you were a member of a team or elite powerlifter or elite Olympic lifter, you didn't wait for science and medicine to be like, oh, and now we're going to do this skill transfer exercise, or this assistance work, or this is the best way to train. What we did was we had this laboratory, and our whole model is test and retest, right? So we didn't believe it. You have to prove it to us every single time. And, so fundamentally, every model has to be able to predict what is going to happen, explain what's happening, and everyone has to be able to communicate that the same way. That's what a good model is. So imagine this is 10 years ago, a few months ago, and I'm at the annual physical therapy convention. Everyone's there, and I'm doing a 3-hour lecture block with a couple other badass physios, and there's like 45 middle-aged physios wearing khakis and high-heeled white tennis sneakers and polos. And I'm talking about this a little bit, about what I'm understanding, and people just lost their minds, like short arc quads and low-level rehab. And I was like, you have become relevant to a generation of athletes, right? Unless it's post-surgical management, where like you've had a knee surgery and someone just needs to rub you and maintain your range of motion. I felt like we had lost this narrative. And so what I decided at that moment, I was just going to go around and was like, oh, I'm just not going to worry about these people. They'll catch up with what's the progressive, cutting edge athletes that we're seeing and working with, who are solving their own pain, right? Applying issues like blood flow restriction. Dude, blood flow restriction is a powerlifting bodybuilding technique. It's not a rehab technique, right? And so it's taken the field a minute. And so when we put the book out, really people didn't understand. The physio community did not understand. We're super threatened by who is this chucklehead who's talking about strength and conditioning and positions. And I wasn't using the corrective exercise language library. I wasn't using that. I was saying, hey, look, I don't need to use a lot of corrective exercises. You can do assistance work, because that's assistance work. We're going to get the tendon strong. We're going to get pumped with blood. We're going to restore positions that get, under load. But what I saw finally was that, man, these athletes who are running far, lifting heavy, their bodies aren't the same as people who are sedentary, who come in and you give someone 3 sets of 10 air squats to a chair that changes their knee pain. Like I'm like, Jess, you need to do 3 sets of 10. You're like, dude, that's how many times I get off the toilet today, right? So, what we saw suddenly was we have an opportunity, and we're going to let the world decide. And what we found was that athletes were looking for better solutions. And check this out. I believe that people are really, really stinking smart. If you give them tools that work, they do it. If you give someone that does something that doesn't work, they will reject it because it didn't change their power, their experience, their pain. And so you can just run everything through that filter. Better, same, worse. Did that help you? Great. Do it again. It didn't help you anymore? Ditch it. And, it took a minute for the rest of the physios to catch up. And I took my practice out of it. I had a box, a pain box, a Connex box. And I was like, nope, I'm not taking insurance. I'll see you for an hour. We'll follow up on text or email as many times as we need until you solve this problem. And what we saw was the beginning of something that was below the surface, which was physical therapists who were also interested in strength work, position work, mechanic, power work. And that performance physio is almost like a completely different language. And it's all based on the language of the athlete. So when you come in, I don't do a bunch of stupid correlate tests. I ask you to do what it is that's giving you the problem so we can understand what it is. So you speak, and everyone on this call speaks the language of rehab. It's not Esperanto. You didn't have to go to physical therapy school. You need to know how much hip flexion you have and why you can't rotate your hip. It's that simple.
And again, it's I'm not sure if people ever quite understand how revolutionary that was because, being a student of the game, when you started saying these things, it kind of blew my mind. And, I think what was most impressive is, you're an incredibly smart person and you're able to speak to, some meatheads and make them understand some really, really high level complex things. And it's always incredibly impressive. But let's wait, a little bit. Go for it.
Let me add one more thing. And that was, I think one of the problems around traditional rehab, look, people get injured. You need someone to help you guide this process sometimes if you don't have it, right? Look at Stuart McGill writing that book, about, pain is a gift, right? Injury is a gift. And, the bottom line is I didn't tell people to stop moving. I didn't take away your community. I didn't take away your agency. I was like, oh, no, we're just going to squat higher for a minute, or we're going to change your squat. And by the way, that was conjugate, right? That was, hey, let's find a different way to squat to get the same stimulus. Like there's some way we're going to pull or lift or move, and you're not going to be mired in some kind of rehab hell for the next 3 months where you become weak, deconditioned, you unload, you lose your positions. I mean, I think the fundamental idea was, hey, we have all the tools we need, and you don't need to spend an hour a day doing this. No one's got time for that. Hit your positions, use today as a diagnostic tool, adjust accordingly. It's that simple. And then rinse, wash, repeat for the next decade or so. Let me know how it goes.